Hello, and welcome to In the Roud. Greetings and salutations, dear listeners. My name is Matt Quinn, and this is In the Roud, a folk song podcast. I'll be your host to guide you through the world of traditional folk song as we go through the Roud Index, one song at a time. Each episode will feature two guests, one providing an historical look at the song, while the other will be a singer from the folk music scene to talk about their own version of the song. If you're new to the podcast, welcome, or new to folk songs in general and are a bit unsure as to what the Roud Index actually is, fret not. If you go back to the very start of this podcast, before episode 1 of season 1, you'll find an introduction episode where we get an actual explanation of what the Roud Index is from the man himself, Steve Roud. I highly recommend listening to that before diving into the episodes themselves. Right now, we're in the middle of season 1, and this is episode 6. We'll be looking at the song labelled Roud 6, which is Long Lankin. Later on, we'll hear from singer Gemma Khawaja, but for now, let's take an historical look at the song with folk historian Vic Gammon. Well, hello and welcome back, Vic Gammon.
Hello.
Hello, how lovely to have you back. How have you been?
Not too bad, a bit busy, but, not too bad.
Good to hear. Right then, Roud 6, Long Lankin. Which is a fascinating song in many respects.
It's a gory song. It's
certainly
horrific
violent.
Song. Yeah.
The only real violence we've had so far on the Roud Index is number 4, Lord Thomas and Fair Eleanor.
What is it? That got the kick in the head against the wall, has it?
It certainly does. Yes. That's what we'll come on to. We do love some gruesomeness in our folk songs.
Yeah.
But Long Lankin then, and various other versions of the title, what's it about? What's the plot? Where do we stand?
A lord leaves his castle, goes off to do something, London or something like that, and he gives instructions that the place is to be well secured before he goes, and the doors bolted, the windows pinned, and so on, so that this guy Lankin or Lambkin or Long Lankin can't creep in. He does get in with the help of a nurse who's obviously an employee of the family, and they're trying to get at his as the lady of the castle. And they do this by torturing the baby, by usually sticking pins or bodkins or whatever into the baby, and inducing the woman to come down to the nurse, who says she can't get him rested, she can't settle him down. And so there's this awful scene of blood and gore of both the baby and the wife killed. And then the Lord returns and he takes the sort of revenge of executing the nurse and Lankin. It's a pretty gruesome and nasty tale. It would make a good horror film.
Yes, absolutely. I'm surprised it's not been done, because there is. This is me and my ridiculous folk nerdism. There is the film The Ballad of Tam Lin, from a few decades back, and which does kind of tell the story of Tam Lin with in film version, but no Long Lankin as yet, anyway.
Well, there you are.
So was this very popular and quite widespread of a song?
It's surprising. I mean, if you look at the Roud Index, you just hit the. I mean, the Roud Index contains duplications, because if there's a manuscript version and a recorded version and a published version, book version, that will show up 3 times, but it comes out with a total hits number of 264, which is, not insignificant. That is a fairly widely known song. It's not up there with Barbara Allen or anything like that, but it's a fairly widely known song, and its geographical distribution is considerable. It's most of the versions recorded come from England, although looking at Child's ballads, you'd think it was pretty much all Scottish or Northumbrian. So again, on crude figures from Roud, 63 from England, 43 from Scotland. So England and Scotland well represented. USA, 96. The song got to America and it got widely reported and it got widely collected. I mean, you've got to think about the differences between, the number of collectors there were, because the American colleges got into collecting in the 1920s, thereabouts. We do often have lots and lots of American versions of these songs. Canada comes up with 23. So, this is a song that's got around. It's got around, and it's obviously lodged in people's memories because, it wouldn't have that geographical distribution if there hadn't been something about it which made it stick.
Yeah, so obviously, yes, people do love a bit of violence and a bit of gore.
Well, that's an interesting question. Why? But maybe we can talk about that later. But
Maybe that'll come up
yes,
later. Yeah,
there's no doubt about this. It's not the most prolific folk song you ever come across, but it's not inconsiderable.
yeah. So, yeah, how far back can we trace this? Where were the sort of earliest printed versions?
The earliest version we know of, 1770s, really. Percy, who produces the relics, Percy's Relics of Ancient English Poetry in the 1760s, someone in Kent sends him a rather fragmentary version of it. But then it gets picked up in Scots ballad books by the early 19th century. It's being reported, heard, and so on, and other Scots collections. So it's known about. And Child has quite a lot. It has about 25 versions in Child. Some of them very complete and very well rounded. Others really not, rather fragmentary, but almost all Scottish. I mean, you look at Child and you think the song's a Scottish song. A couple of Northumbrian versions, and this misleads a very good writer, Anne Gilchrist, saying that there's a Scottish strand and there's a Northumbrian strand, but actually the song has been widely collected in the south of England, in the East Anglia, in the Midlands. It's pretty much got there. Not much on broadsides. There's one Johnny Pitt's broadside about, I don't know, 1810, 1820, something round then, which is
1820, I think. I did have the number written down
yeah,
somewhere
you can
earlier.
never be that sure with Pitt broadsides, but it's about then, It's
Oh yeah, something I found said circa 1820.
yeah,
So yeah,
the circa is as close as you get, really.
yeah, yeah.
What you know about broadside printers on the whole is the range of dates that they were at a certain premises, because that's been traced through legal records. It's very rare that broadsides are actually dated. Sometimes you come across it. I've come across some 17th century ones that were dated, which is wonderful to have because you can then be a bit more precise. But no, so it crops up on a broadside. And one of the most interesting things about it is that these two strands of it, as to what is the motivation for the killing that goes on, because in a lot of particularly the English versions, there seems to be no motivation. There's the warning, beware of Lankin, you keep yourself locked up, and then he gets in and does his mayhem. And there's but the Scottish versions, and notably the wonderful Anna Brown of Falkland, Mrs. Brown, great. If there's an A version in Child's ballads, it's usually a Mrs. Brown. I mean, not all of them, but she's the one he really likes, and she produces. And then it's about a mason. It's about Lankin was a mason good as ever built with stone, and he built Lord Weird's castle, but payment he got none. So the whole thing is set up as a revenge on this lack of payment for the castle, for building the castle. But the difference between the two strands, you can just lop that first couple of verses off, and what you get is pretty much the shape of the English and North American versions, without the motivation of the Masons' lack of payment.
That's right, because I remember I used to sing a version of this almost 20 years ago, blimey. And from that was in an earlier print of the Penguin Book of English Folk Songs,
Yeah,
and that didn't have the whole setup and the payment thing.
This is the wonderful Sister Emma version. Great tune, actually.
That's right, that one. Yeah, terrific stuff.
And yes, I mean, said the Lord to his lady, as he, he's leaving, and he says to her, "Beware of Long Lankin, who lives in the moss, lives in the hay." That's right. And so, what you get is the first. This is an interesting thing about narrative. What you get first of all is what's called an interdiction, an instruction. Do this. And of course, to be a story, it has to not be done in some way, and then you've got a drama going, which is of course Lankin getting inside and causing his mayhem.
So between its earliest printed ones that we know about, up to, even to more recent recordings of people singing it from the last century, has the plot changed much, or is it relatively kind of stayed the same?
It's pretty stable. I mean, some of the versions are rather fragmentary. They're obviously a lack of memory on the part of the singer, but the basic sort of plot of, entry, murder, retribution stays pretty much the same. I mean, some of it is just obviously incomplete in some versions, but I mean, generally, no, it stays the same. And that pit broadside we're talking about, it's very much there's no Mason in that. It's just the Lord to his lady, and that seems to be the common English version. Although some of the Mason versions get to the USA, sometimes that motivational verse. So it's very interesting that some, what's important about a song, what can get lost. And it seems to me the importance of this song is to do with that inner struggle between the outsider that gets in and causes death and destruction. It's not about what it's for. And there are other ballads where that's the case, where there isn't a clear motive for what's going on. You're just interested in what's going on, basically. One of the interesting things, in some of those more elaborate Scottish versions, you get a sort of class-conscious aspect, which doesn't necessarily come through in the English versions. In Mrs. Brown's version, for example, the Child A version, "Oh, shall I kill..." I'm rendering this into English because I can't do. I should have been granddad was Scots, so I can't do the Scots language. "Oh, shall I kill her, nurse, or shall I let her be? Oh, kill her, lambkin, for she ne'er was good to me. Oh, scour the basin, nurse, and make it fair and clean, for to keep this lady's heart's blood, for she comes a nobler kin. There need nae basin, lambkin, let it run through the floor. What better is the heart's blood o' the rich than o' the poor?" This is the wonderful Mrs. Brown's version. Now, there's a whole interesting discussion and debate about Mrs. Brown of Falkland. Funnily enough, I'm going to Falkland on Friday. But she was a professor's daughter from Aberdeen, and she had a way. She seemed to be one of those people who could recreate ballads and elaborate upon them as she did it. And so, there's the sense is how much is she the ballad singer passing on the tradition, and how much is she the creator of the tradition? I think she's a really interesting case. And my friend Ruth Perry, who's an American writer, is just about to produce what I think, I haven't seen it yet, I've seen the cover, produce a very interesting book. She's taken years to do it, so it's got to be, one thinks it's got to be good. But it's about Mrs. Brown and her rather interesting and elaborate ballads. But Child loved them, obviously. Child thought they were the bee's knees, because if you go through Child's ballad collection, you find that a lot of his A versions are Mrs. Brown of Falkland. Okay, there's some versions have a really nice ending. I mean, the common ending of the ballad is that Lambkin gets hung and the nurse gets burnt. Now this may just be poetic fancy, although burning was a punishment for treason at certain stages in the past, and the treason of a servant to a master was seen as similar of the treason to a subject to a king, so it could be subject to the to burning, but it's rare. But there's this version. So I just picked this up from Child's L version. "Bonny sang yon bird as he sat upon the tree, but sair grat Lankin, for he was hanged high. Bonny sang the bird that sat upon the hill, but sair grat the nurse when the cauldron gan to boil." So this is, I mean, this is. Sometimes she's burnt at the stake, but I love that opposition that the ballad singer gets between the singing of the bird. You know, it's the mavis, the lark in some versions. You know, this bird singing beautifully, and these people having this horrible punishment of death. You know, I think that's something else.
I was just trying to find the words for the Sister Emma one to see what the outcome of that was, the exact words. But I think it's, yeah, Long Lankin was hanged by on a
On the
turret so high. I think it's
turret
turret.
so high, so you can
And
hang him from the tower. Yes.
yeah, and then false nurse was burned in a fire close by. I think that's what it is. It's
Yeah.
but the hanged up from a turret so high was rather good.
But I like that some versions have this juxtaposition of the little birds tweeting and singing while
Yes,
that's
that's lovely. That's lovely. That yeah,
that
yeah.
mayhem is going on. Um, it's a difficult song, really. I mean, I once sang it at Lewis Folk Club, and you know, and it was mostly an audience that knew traditional song and knew what it was, you know, knew the range of stuff that it exists within the sort of body of material. But there was obviously someone in the second row that hadn't. And when I got to the verse, you know, they pricked him all over with a pin, and the nurse held the basin for the blood to flow in. They're pricking the baby. She goes, ah!
Yeah.
Audibly sort of sickening, which, you know, it's actually, on reflection, is not a bad reaction to
No,
that.
it can be a shock if you're not expecting it. I think. Yeah.
It does see, you know, the whole song is about massive transgression, isn't it? It's about massive transgression. I mean, the Lord goes away when he should be, in a sense, in the patriarchal sense, looking after his family. He goes away. He gives some instructions, but they're not carried out properly. The nurse who should be, you know, looking after the baby is the instrument of his torture, in a way, pricking him with a pin. Lankin gets in from the outside and ends up killing the baby and the lady of the house. So it's all about, you know, the world not put the world upside down, the world upset, and and although order is restored at the end with the executions, these bloody executions, it's not restored in a way that you think, well, that's all right now then. It's restored in a way that says, well, you know, yeah, that was okay. That we've hit some sort of new norm, but my God, what have we lost on the?
I know that the baby is still dead. You know.
The baby is dead. The wife is dead. The Lord is
Yeah.
upset. One would think.
So I was reading something about this early today that was well, I can't actually remember much about it, but I wondered if you had any thoughts on it. About why they wanted the blood of the baby in the first place.
Yeah, you know, there's I very skeptical about imposing theories on material. I think you go with the material, and there's, you know, one of the things, it's a cure for leprosy, or it's you know, it's some sort of blood sacrifice, a bit like
Yeah, I was about to ask, is there anything to do with witchcraft in hidden in the depths and the back of this? But obviously, maybe not.
well, maybe there is, but what? Who cares in a way? I mean, I don't think origins matter so much as use. You know, the point is this song was remembered. It was quite useful. It's remembered in a form which is about violence, violation of the family. It's about those things. Whatever the origin, it's like this. All this stuff. Do you remember all this stuff about the, you know, Ring a Ring of Roses is about the plague? Do you think kids on the playground when I was a kid doing Ring of Roses were thinking about the bloody plague? Of course they weren't. They were doing Ring a Ring of, you know. So I think origins are always interesting. It's interesting to know where something came from. It's interesting to know the origin of a word or something. But for goodness sake, when a thing is in the popular imagination, like this song is, what's important is that this thing, as it is in the popular imagination. I don't think it's important, you know. it's really important to say, well, really, this is about something else. It's about leprosy. It's about blood sacrifice. I don't think so. I mean, if you take a ballad, an anti-Semitic ballad like the Jew's Garden, it's Sir Hugh of Lincoln ballad, Little Sir Hugh. I mean, that is about the blood sacrifice. Now it may be terrible ideology and so on, but it's quite clear that's what it's about. I don't think this song is. This song is about violence, and the question I suppose we come to is why violence is so fascinating. Why we have why people will bother to have something. I have this song in my memory. It's burnt. I learnt it as a kid from the Penguin book. I learnt it. I remember walking home from school, learning it, thinking this is sort of, I don't know why I felt that as a 13, 14-year-old that I had to learn it, but I did, and it stuck there.
Yeah, it's interesting, the whole thing about why do we love horror movies? Well, why do some people like horror movies anyway? I know a lot of people who think I'm mad for the amount of horror movies that I watch, but I guess there's a certain element of it that is exposing ourselves to something that is genuinely frightening, but from the comfort of our armchair.
I think that's right.
There's something very comforting about putting yourself through the paces of this terrifying thing, but in a couple of hours you'll be fine because you're still at home and you'll be all right. I think horror movies are awesome, certainly the good ones anyway. I think they're really fantastic. And I imagine that stems from, or it's parallel to the idea of telling scary stories around the campfire.
Yeah, ghost stories.
It's good fun. It's just good fun. Kids love a good scare.
Yes, absolutely.
There's this whole thing about shielding kids from the violent aspects of some stories. I think kids love the gory stuff and the gruesome and the good scare.
When we were kids, I was born just after the war, and there was still I was South London, and there was still a lot of bomb sites and old bits of houses that were derelict and we used to get into these, and we used to sit round in these old houses, and we did find a load of porno magazines in one, which was quite exciting for youngsters. But we used to sit around and tell ghost stories and sing ghosty songs. The woman sat on the churchyard wall. We used to scare ourselves purposely. And I mean, there must be some reason. I think you've got close to it. I mean, it's a safe environment, a controlled environment, but you can experience fear and shock and the sort of adrenaline rush that gives you.
Yeah.
And in certain ways, I don't like all horror. I can't watch all horror films. I must admit, there are moments when I just shut my eyes or turn away. But I absolutely see there's something in that which is sort of attractive and sort of, satisfying in a way, because otherwise they wouldn't be. Always have to ask the question: why is this a success? Why is this popular? Why has this song lasted 200 years and more? What are we talking about? 17? Yes, it's getting on for 200 years, isn't it? I mean, and it may be older than that. The fact that it was reported in a fragmentary version in the 1770s, the song could be older. We just may not have an earlier version of it. But I mean, the fact it's had a grasp on the popular imagination for that time means that it must be doing something for the people who sing it, learn it, listen to it.
It's just I think we just love a good scare places, and sometimes that comes more of it into not that this song has anything to do with Christmas particularly, but or at all, but there's a whole tradition of ghost stories at Christmas, and the BBC did a long running series of a ghost story for Christmas.
M.R. James stuff,
and M.R. James, and a lot of people always ask, what is it about Christmas that makes us want to tell ghost stories? And I personally, I think it all stems back to Charles Dickens and A Christmas Carol. The ghosts turn up at Christmas. I'd be interested to see if there's any earlier instances of
older folk stories.
Christmas.
I mean, I'm not an expert on folk stories by any means, but there's certainly ghosty stories that seem to be older than that. I mean, the idea of ghosts go back a long way. I mean, we maybe talk about this in connection with other songs, but there do seem to be different sorts of ghosts. What's interesting, if you look at the old 17th century stuff, the ghosts are pretty violent. They seem to be able to whip people off to places of torment or they seem to be able to, in the Cruel Ship's Carpenter, it's she
Oh yeah,
ripped him, she stripped him, she tore him in three. This is a ghost. It's a pretty material ghost. This is not some spirit or something. Um, so ideas of ghosts are there quite early on,
yeah,
and whether they're unsettled spirits or what. The interesting
absolutely.
thing, and this is a bit of a byway really, is when you get to the lover's ghost, the night visit song type ghost, then it seems to be a benevolent ghost that comes. The Willie of the Bay of Biscay is the lover who wants to who just wants to communicate with his lost loved one, and so on. Anyway, that's other songs. There are no ghosts in Lamkin isn't a ghost. He's very real. He's very dangerous. He's very potent in a way, and he's really about. You see, I would like to see these in a wider mythological sort of way. This is a song about. I mean, all songs are for them to have a purchase, for them to have a grip on people's imagination. They've got to somehow relate to experience. Now, that doesn't mean they have to be realist in that way. What's this song? What's the message of this song? It's, well, look up your house at night. Look after your family. Don't leave them these are sort of like ideas that are, seem to me to be all right. They're maybe patriarchal ideas because it's the man leaving that allows the disorder. Lampkin is a bad man.
Yeah,
The nurse is female, but she can't manage it on her own. It's Lampkin coming in that causes the mayhem. The wife is a good mother, but she can't protect her baby. You see what I mean? There's a sort of gender dynamic going on in this ballad, which I think is quite potent and quite interesting. So the general message is men should be strong and protective, and women should be, they should be loyal, and they should look after their families. There's a sort of almost like a patriarchal model going on in this song.
mm.
On its own, that doesn't mean a lot. It's when you've lined that up with all sorts of other songs that have similar messages that you're talking about the ways in which ideas circulate in society, and I think that's interesting.
And then you get a little bit of crime doesn't pay right at the end
Yeah,
because
yeah.
the two assailants are in fact caught and
Yeah, but after the event, I mean,
dispatched.
after the event, that's the point. You haven't
Yes,
prevented it
indeed.
happening. The
No, yeah.
punishment, as a present government is keen on punishment, but it doesn't seem to stop the crime.
No,
Uh,
exactly. And actually, it even occurred to me the it says and the woman was burned. That was a common way of getting rid of a witch as well. If you really wanted,
well, not in England.
not okay, right there we go. Not in
Not
England.
in Scotland, where they had Roman law, that was the case. In
Right.
England, witches were hung, but the common association is.
Yeah, that's in America
But
certainly. And
burning can be done for treason, I think, in England.
you did say that. You did say that.
In English common law. It's interesting because it is different in the different parts of Britain as to what the law, how the law worked, and I think witches were actually hung. It's a common. I think it's a filmic idea that you burn witches.
You
You
burn
did
witches
in the
at the stake.
continent. You see, Roman law on the continent, you did burn witches.
Yeah,
Which is a pretty awful way of dying, but it was only for treason. If it was treason, you could burn them. I think
that's right. I wanted to ask you. I don't know if you can talk about this or not. Is about the use of pins.
Well, that's an interesting thing. Because I wrote a paper on this ballad years ago with my friend Peter Stalibras, who's now, I haven't seen him for years now, but he's professor at Penn State University in the USA. But
Right.
he taught me at Sussex, and then we became great friends. But there's something interesting about the fact that in some of the versions, they talk about the doors being bolted and the windows all pinned. And then in some versions where that is said, you get the pin as the way of hurting the baby. And you get there's one version where the doors are bolted and then they ram a bolt up the baby's nose as a way of
Oh.
torturing the baby. And I'm sorry about this, but we're dealing with
And
this.
there's songs I've sung where, like, to gain entrance into a house, or to as in ringing the doorbell, you turn at the pin.
Yeah, He twirled at the pin. That's right. Yeah. So that was I don't know. I mean, maybe we overstated it in that early paper, but I do think there's something interesting there, where the very thing that protects you, the door bolt, the door pin, is the very thing which is used to harm the baby, and Freudians would have a great field day with this.
Yes, I wonder if that was
This is this
whether
is
that's a deliberate sort of thing or just a coincidence.
it can be both. It can be neither in a way. I mean, as well. It can be just a coincidence which happens to sort of reinforce and sort of almost resonate with each other. I mean, it depends how intensely you read the thing, but I think it's interesting that the things which protects is the thing which destroys. That's certainly the case in some versions of this ballad, not all by any means. I went through The Child this morning and had a look, and mostly it's bodkins, knives, pins.
What's a bodkin?
A bodkin is a little. Well, it's. I think it's in Hamlet, isn't it? Make a quietus with a bare bodkin. It's a sort of small knife, a small, or it can be like a needle, something like that, a large needle, something of that sort.
There's a mention of a bodkin in the Gordon Hall version of Barbara Allen, and so there's a bodkin in there. So
right.
I'll keep mentioning Gordon Hall in this podcast, try and drum up some interest.
Well, he was wonderful. He was.
Yes.
I mean, I knew Gordon quite well, and he was 19 stone of loveliness. I mean, an amazingly powerful singer.
Yeah.
I remember I was with Reg Hall at Cecil Sharp House, and Gordon came on, and Reg turned to Sheila and said, "Is he for real?" And we said, "Yeah, he's for real. He's Gordon. He comes and sings with us." And he did have this family tradition, and he was interested in the songs as well. And he was a Mrs. Brown in a way, because he sort of recrafted the songs quite a lot. His songs are so long, a lot of them. They just go on and on.
That's
and
right.
he added bits in and did all sorts of stuff. But he was something else.
I'm making an effort of mine to learn all of his epic ballads.
Wow, I do think that
I've got a handful. I've got a handful in there already.
They last sometimes 10 minutes and 12 minutes.
Well, his Lord Bateman was about 19 minutes, but that's the way he sang it. Yes. And if I sing it at a normal pace, then it's actually about 11. He did slow it down a lot. But anyway, as far as I can tell,
we're off the subject.
As far as I can tell, no long Lankin from Gordon Hall.
No, not that I know of. I never heard him sing it. I heard him sing lots of stuff. He regularly used to come to the sing around sessions with the Coppu family that I attended.
That's right.
In the sort of, that would have been the 80s into the early 90s, and he was a formidable singer. I mean, just one. Indeed. And I love the way his singing style, the way he would do "yeah" at the end of a line was just absolutely fabulous.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
You knew where his line ended.
Anyway, anyway, back to the pins. I'm just it's a fascinating sort of duality, or opposite of duality maybe, of the dual usage of the word pin.
Yeah, it is indeed.
But any other lines of inquiry you want to discuss, or
one of the things is about the castle. What Lord Weary's castle. I mean, Child has a really funny. I mean, Child is not a bag of laughs on the whole when you read him, but he says it rather dryly. But I actually think this is a joke. He said there are few places where the ballad is remembered, but which have also some ancient edifice in the neighbourhood reared by the hands of Lankin. That is, so what he's saying is, if people remember the ballad Lankin, they point to some old ruin that was Lord Weary's castle or the Lord's castle. There's one just down the valley from here. The Nafferton is now the university's organic farm, but there was Nafferton Hall, and
right.
This was said to be the castle that Lankin built, but there's also places in Scotland that are said to be where Lankin operated. I don't think this it's like the origin theory stuff. I don't think it matters. I mean, what's important is the potency of a story.
Absolutely. So I was actually going to ask briefly about the name of the Lord. Does that relatively stay the same, or do the Sister Emma one? didn't have the name of the Lord. It was just
A lot of
the
them
Lord.
don't. A lot of them don't have the Lord's name. It's the Scottish ones that, and he's often Lord Weary or some version like that, which sort of sounds as if he's a bit tired and a bit past it, doesn't it?
The weary
Not
Lord.
protecting his family properly, maybe.
Well,
Maybe there's an inference in that. But no, said the Lord to his lady. It's far from impersonal. The
yeah.
names, the only one who's named is Lamkin or no, Bo Lamkin or Long Lankin. I mean, there's all these variations on the
And
I rather like bollocking. Some of the American versions come out as
that's right.
bollocking.
And there's what's the word? Lincoln as well. That
Yeah,
turns up, doesn't
Cruel
it?
Lincoln comes up. That's the Ben Butcher version. That
That's right. Which we'll come on to. We might as well come
yeah,
on to
yeah.
now. So yeah, there aren't that many recordings of traditional singers
No,
singing this
no.
one.
There's a few stuff. There's a few bits in the manuscripts. In Sharp's manuscript and in a few others. There's some
Yeah,
bits.
but the
There
20th
aren't many.
century 20th
20th
century
century, no. I
recordings,
mean, that Ben Butcher one is the one I remember because liked the tune. I thought it was a nice
and
tune.
that's so we'll definitely recommend that one. That's collected by Bob Copper, isn't it?
Bob Copper, yeah, in his, I heard it on it, I think on his Songs and Southern Breezes CD, and it's in his book as well, Songs and Southern Breezes. He got another, this Hampshire thing about this song. He got another version of Lambkin as well from another singer. I can't remember the name, but he certainly collected more than one
Wow.
version. The stuff that sticks in my mind is some of the American versions, and there are some. If you delve on the websites, like the Library of Congress website, you'll find American versions. But Frank Prophet, who was a fabulous singer
Ah,
that the
yes.
Warner family found, "Hang Down Your Head, Tom Dooley" was his to start with,
Right.
which became a hit for the Kingston Trio and Lonnie Donegan and so on. His is a nice, restrained mountain version. Revival singers, Hetty West. I mean,
Oh,
I loved her singing. I loved her banjo playing. She was just formidable. I saw her once do an entire set and not pause between the songs. Just went from one song to another. I mean, sort of
wow.
strange thing to do, really, and not exactly a way of setting up a relationship with an audience, but quite impressive in a way. I mean, I have to gather my thoughts and think, what am I doing next, sort of thing. But she could do
Yeah.
that.
No, yeah, the
Sadly,
Frank Prophet is really, really good. Really
yeah.
good one. And
There
that's
aren't many recordings
and
though.
that's called is that a
I can't remember.
Bo Lamkin or something? It's one of those ones,
Yes,
isn't
it's
it?
one of those, I think. Yeah.
Uh, yes, I did.
Consult the Round Index and all will be revealed. Round 6 and the new.
Well,
People are moaning about they've just put the new website, the EFDS. I've found it fine working on my new Mac. It doesn't work so
yeah.
well on my iPad, but working on my new Mac, I think it's lovely, and you can do all sorts of nice filtering and so on to find stuff, which is sort of
Yes,
interesting.
I haven't had a chance to do.
I mean, we're recording days after it's been released
Yes,
in a sort of
we're
beta
recording this on
version.
the 8th of May, so it's only just come out,
It's
the
only
new
just come
version.
out, yeah. And
Yes, I'm going to look through it. Yeah, the Frank Prophet was Bo Lamkin. It's on
yeah,
the Nothing Seems Better to Me, the Warner collection
right. Yes, it's certainly
things. Which,
and it's in the Warner book, I think. And
yeah, yeah,
but you'll find quite a lot. As I say, the American versions of it are quite formidable in number. The ways in which because the one of the things they did in some of the colleges in the USA, maybe I've said this before, but it is quite significant, is they got the college professors in some of the southern states, particularly, but also New England, they sent out their students to collect songs from their families. And so they got a very large archive of songs. That's why we often have more uh, American versions of British songs than we have British versions recorded in the field. And if you look through the old Journal of American Folklore and publications like that, you'll find a lot of this stuff. It is quite remarkable how much was
right.
obtained. And then projects like the New Deal projects of the 30s, one of the things they did was fund folk song collectors, which is sort of rare, but it meant you got a lot of very interesting material collected.
Yeah, and then I'd recommend a couple of versions that come up in releases by Veteran Records, the late John Howson's record label of traditional songs and music. George Fradley from Derbyshire had a fragmentary version on the release. It was on a Market Day, Volume 1, which was of two, which was really good, nice fragments. And then Hockey Feltwell, Arthur Feltwell, Hockey Feltwell, his nickname was Hockey, had Lankin, which is 3.5 minutes, so that might be a fuller version, and that's on the CD Heel and Toe, which is all stuff collected in Norfolk, Cambridgeshire, and Essex from the Fenland schoolteacher Sam Steele. So I highly recommend those two, Hockey Feltwell and George Fradley, and yeah, so they are.
I suppose one of the interesting questions is why we sing a song like this today, and I have been guilty of doing that. I think you have. You know, why is that relevant? I mean, I don't want to revolt or shock people, but I do think there's something interesting about this song, which I remember I was with some students once and they said, "Oh, do you know this song?" I said, "I do know this song." And they were absolutely fascinated to hear it. We were up in London doing a thing at Cecil Sharp House, and it was like before going to bed having a cup of tea sort of thing at the end of the evening, and it was just, that they, oh yeah, no, that's really, I mean, it may be this horror film thing. It may be this, how far can you go? How far can you go to talk about, what happens in human relationships? And, awful things do happen in the world, and we have to sort of confront them. You see, I would sing that, then I start questioning my own, what am I up to? Because I would sing that song in I'd say something about it first. I wouldn't sing the Sir Hugh of Lincoln, Little Sir Hugh. I think it's pure anti-Semitism, Little Sir Hugh, and I wouldn't sing that.
Right.
I know I'm censoring the past in doing that, so there's a real lot of interesting questions around that.
That's a debate for another podcast, a whole
Well,
separate podcast.
Never short of ideas, Matt. Never short of ideas.
No, absolutely not. We'll definitely have that at some point, I'm sure. I think that's about it for now. So.
Well, nice to speak to you.
That's you too. So that's your last appearance for this season. We'll definitely have you on a couple of times in season 2 when we get to that. But for the time being, thanks very much, Vic.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It's been good fun.
Cheers. And there we go. That's the historical side of Long Lankin. Huge thanks again to Vic Gammon. We're now at the halfway point in the episode, so we'll just take a minute or so to listen to a few snippets of different versions sung by traditional singers. So what you're going to hear now is a snippet of Cruel Lincoln from Ben Butcher, Beau Lambkin from Frank Prophet, Lankin from George Fradley, and Lambkin from Hockey Feltwell.
As the Lord to the lady, I am now going out. Beware of cruel Lincoln, whilst I am gone out. What cares I for Lincoln, or any of his kin? My doors are all bolted, my windows are pinned.
Beau Lankin was a fine mason as ever laid a stone. He built a fine castle and the pay he got none. He swore by his maker he'd kill him unknown. Beware of Beau Lampkins when I'm gone from home. Beau Lankin came to the castle and he knocked till it rung. There's no one as ready as a paltry. She arose and let him in.
You can have my daughter Betsy, so young and so sweet. You can have as much money as the stones in the street. I don't want your daughter Betsy, or the stones in the street. I would rather see your life's blood rolling down at my feet. False Lankin nipped the baby and caused it to cry, and the nurse kept on singing, "Hush your baby, bye-bye." There was blood on the staircase, there was blood in the hall, there was blood on the carpet where the lady did fall.
What care I for false False Lankin crept in, and he pricked one of the elder babes with his bright silver pins.
And you can find the links to those tracks and the albums they're from in the episode notes. On to the second half. To chat about the song from a singer's perspective, I spoke with singer Gemma Khawaja. Welcome to In the Roud, Gemma Khawaja. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Hello. Oh, I'm very well, thank you.
Good.
How are you doing?
I'm all right. I'm fine.
Good. You're quite busy these days, I see from
Quite
your emails.
I think it's just the nature of being a freelancer, doing several different things. You juggle a lot of plates and spend a lot of time putting things in your diary so you don't have to remember them, but then running around to do everything. So yeah, but it's all good.
Many fingers in many pies.
Many pies, too many pies sometimes.
Yes, or self-unemployed, as I call it sometimes.
Yes.
It does feel like that occasionally.
Yeah.
But anyway, moving on. So you're here to discuss Roud 6, which is Long Lankin, and we'll get to that shortly. First of all, tell us a bit about yourself, your history with music in general, and folk music as well. Did you grow up with folk music, or did you discover it? Was it a find?
It was a find later in life. So, there's two bits of the story really. So I don't have a folky background. I don't have particularly parents that were into folk music per se, although there was a little bit happening, which I'll come back to in a minute. And so really the way I understand folk music now and the stuff that I'm interested in, so I'm interested in singing old songs basically, and my understanding of I'm not going to get into the definition of folk song because it's a whole can of worms.
Yeah, we had that a few episodes ago. Steve Roud provided us with his explanation of that.
And I listened to that, and I've read the book as well, so I'm not even going to get into anything that's to do with definitions. There are far too many scholars listening. But all I mean is when I was a kid, I had a different understanding of folk music to my feeling about it now. So the stuff that I'm into now, and being a singer, going to sessions, singing unaccompanied songs, sometimes accompanying myself, the stuff that I'm talking about now is things that I understand to be in the repertoire of sort of songs of the British Isles and Ireland, and then stuff that went to America and came back. So that's what I'm into now, and I didn't really get into that, and I made my kind of discovery of all of that quite late in life, so probably when I was about 30 or so about 15 years ago, so I'm a relative newbie to it. But then going back to singing, I've sung all of my life, and then the reason I probably have sung all my life is because I grew up in an incredibly noisy house with a lot of siblings, so there were four of us, and both my mum and dad played music, very different tastes though. So my dad's Pakistani. He came to this country probably in about 1959 when he was about 19, and so the stuff he was listening to when I was growing up was what would have been the Bollywood Indian film industry songs of the day. And we grew up in the Midlands. He could pick up Radio Leicester, which played all these kind of Bollywood classic songs, so that was going on, and I would say that was an influence, because what I took from those songs is they're incredibly melodic and they're quite dramatic. So if you've watched a Bollywood film, they're quite sort of high drama, quite involved, and the songs are as well. And I feel that is something that is a parallel with folk songs. They can be quite dramatic,
right?
Quite
okay,
melodic and intense.
Yeah, a lot of people know I'm an intense film buff, but I must admit that much to my shame, Bollywood is not an area I've managed to delve into yet.
Well, there used to be a term for some of the movies that were certainly coming out in the 70s, and the key ones that my dad, even though my dad was Pakistani, he was very interested in the Indian films and things. I guess it was a connection through language to his own culture. But the films, certainly from the 70s, they were given a nickname. They were called masala movies. And masala means a little bit of everything. You know, it's a mix of things. Right. And I've certainly got memories that my sister can corroborate with, where it feels like about 20 different films, random moments from, and then you suddenly realise as an adult, oh, that was all from one film. So it's kind of like that. There's one with the dancer dancing on glass to save her lover, and all these things. And so I really think that was an influence on my singing. This kind of, I'm not bilingual, but I do remember we used to try and sing along with the songs, and I know all the tunes of them. So they were intensely melodic, and they had this intensity to them. So there's that. And then the other side of it is what I used to know as folk music as a kid, which is what would be the singer-songwriters of the 1960s who were inspired by the folk revival. So obviously Bob Dylan is one, so he started in folk music, and then he went on to do his own material. So when I was growing up, that was the sort of stuff my mum was into. So she was into Bob Dylan and kind of that, and Leonard Cohen and all those sorts of American singer-songwriters. But the funny thing was that she didn't know about what was happening in the UK at the time. So people like Anne Briggs, Nick Jones, John Kirkpatrick, Shirley Collins, so that sort of same generation in a way of singers, which was what was happening in the UK, and which was a rich feeding source for this kind of American revival, which led into the big sort of singer-songwriter movements, and to people like Joni Mitchell, who is classed as folk, but actually is a singer-songwriter, essentially. So the kind of American singer-songwriter stuff is what my mum was listening to. But the one crossover is that she listened to Joan Baez, and there was an album, a portrait of Joan Baez, that was played non-stop. And actually, my earliest, I picked up a guitar quite young, probably about 13. There was a guitar in the house, and I pretty much covered every single song on that Joan Baez album. And that was a big sort of influence to me. But at the time, I wasn't differentiating between her cover on that particular album. She sings Farewell Angelina, it's a Bob Dylan song, so I wasn't differentiating between that and something like Geordie or The Trees Grow High. So I was singing them all from that young age, but not knowing The Trees Grow High and Geordie were sort of something else. But I came back to that a bit later in my life.
So then, so 15 years ago then, what was your sort of introduction to folk music then, the thing that really got you sort of in?
I'd always sung. I'd kept up my singing from a young age. I'd gone through university, got very into electronic music and dance music and stuff. But the singing had sort of always been there, and I'd often, I'd taught myself guitar from a young age. It would come and go from my life. And I'd always sort of learned songs I was interested in. So through the 1990s, I was just listening to a lot of indie stuff and covering it and singing it. I had a phase where I was into some folky-ish bands. There was a band from the Midlands called the New Cranes, and there was the Levellers, of course, and that was probably when I was about 12, 13. And so I'd kind of got into that. But again, and then I'd sort of heard of Steel Eye Span even, and I'd heard of Fairport Convention, but that was obviously what they were doing in the 90s, so I didn't really know about their sort of past.
Of course, yeah.
So there's kind of these things where there's so much that lies so parallel to this sort of discovery of what I now am immersed in. So it's quite interesting to think about it. But I suppose what happened was I'd always kept up the singing, and then it was probably the invention of the internet that opened the floodgates for me. I just had this craving I suddenly was in a sort of playing the guitar phase again when I was in my 20s, but nothing that I'd, all the cover songs and things that I did from bands of the 90s, they weren't really hitting it for me. And I was thinking, and I can write songs myself, but at the same time I was like, I really want to learn something new, and I don't know what it is that I want to learn. And then I was thinking about these Joan Baez things, and I was thinking, well, I really used to love singing those songs, and I don't know what it is. And then I kind of went back to that album, learnt how to play the songs, and then the three I kept coming back to were an American song about making illegal whiskey, which is called Copper Kettle, and then it was The Trees Grow High and Geordie, as she calls it. And then I think I looked them up on the internet, and you suddenly start to open things. And then I was like, oh, they're folk songs. And then I started to look up folk songs, and then I was thinking about the seasons, and I think I actually typed into YouTube folk songs about the snow. And the big thing that opened a massive door was it came up with Anne Briggs singing The Snow It Melts the Soonest.
Yes.
And the thing that really resonated with me, so that suddenly clicked, whatever it was that I was looking for at that time. I'd said, I was looking for something to sing that filled whatever it was, it satisfied me in some way. And that ticked that box. And then the other thing was I grew up in a bit of a crap town in the Midlands called Long Eaton. And Long Eaton's next to another equally crap town called Towton. And actually that's where Anne Briggs grew up, in Towton. And I think from quite a young age, she rode off when she was about 14. I think she rode on a bike to Scotland or something. And I sort of started to read about her because, Wikipedia existed 15 years ago. And that just opened up a whole lot of stuff. And actually, I'm going to, be a champion of the internet here and of early YouTube, that now algorithms can be quite annoying because it can block you from looking for stuff you're interested in. But then there weren't so much algorithms, but it did suggestions. And as soon as I'd gone on YouTube and I'd started looking up Anne Briggs, it started coming up with recommendations. So within about the space of a week, I kind of learned about the English folk revival and suddenly my brain was melting. And then I suddenly had all these songs and certainly for a couple of years, so it must have been maybe 17 years ago, 15 to 17 years ago. I was either in my late 20s or about 30. I just suddenly started learning all of these songs, and it just really filled this hole. And then as you start learning them, and then obviously then it starts to lead to you looking stuff up and buying stuff online and LPs, and then you start to look at the singers where they learnt it from, and you see, oh, that came out of a book, or that came from this. And then I started to learn about Cecil Sharp and the Song Collectors and about source singers. And then I soon realised quite quickly that I really liked source singers. And so at that point I lived in Norfolk. So I've lived in Norfolk since 1998. And then I really quite quickly, suddenly, after going, starting to go to sessions and things, started to learn about Harry Cox and Walter Pardon and Sam Larner. And Harry Cox particularly, just that was it for me, really. And sort of going right back to those sources. I think it's a good way to learn songs because there's always a danger. And I certainly had this in my young teens when I was singing Joan Baez. I think one of the ways that we learn any form of arts, actually, not just music, is you imitate. And some people break that habit and become themselves, which is great, but some people always imitate. So there are definitely a million English, often, and young men singer-songwriters who sound like Bob Dylan and sing with an American accent. And I recognised that was, so with some of the Joan Baez stuff, some of it fitted in because I've got a Nottingham accent, so I would say glass like an American does. So some of it worked quite well for me, but I quite quickly realised when I was younger, I'm not singing in my own voice, and I worked on that to just sort of be me when I do stuff. And actually I can say that's something that happens in other art forms. So I'm a puppeteer and a storyteller, I work in children's theatre, and actually just this week, just yesterday in fact, I performed a new show. I'd had to learn, my friend Joy has a company, she wanted me to learn her show, so I've just done it over the course of 2 weeks. Did the first performance yesterday.
Wow.
And my main comment on myself was I realised, at the moment, because it's brand new, because Joy's taught it to me, and she's taught it to me verbally and visually, do this now, be this character. And I realised I'm being too much like Joy when I do this, but that's because it's brand new, and I know that will change as I perform it over the next month. So it's quite
over time. Yeah,
it's an interesting thing to observe in music. Well, we all do it, and it's a really necessary way to learn. But for me, what becomes interesting is when you drop your heroes and you just allow yourself to be you, and it's got a bit of all that history in it too. So is Absolutely. That a full enough history of me?
yeah, no, it's good. It's all good here. Right then, Long Lankin. Do you remember your first kind of finding of this song? Do you remember where you first heard it, or?
Well, if I'm very honest, I probably first heard it at a folk sing-around session somewhere, but didn't properly clock it. There's so much stuff that you just hear at sessions, and it goes in your brain somewhere. So it probably had been sung. But the first version I remember noticing was Alistair Roberts. So it's actually a new version, the first sort of version that I remember the song from, and that was, he made an album, I guess it was probably 2008, 9 or 10 time. It was called Too Long in This Condition, and it was on then. So it was sort of, I think he made that, that was before my folk discovery, just a bit before, but at the time I was getting into it, I became friends with him because somebody in his band at the time who was on that record is also a puppeteer and worked at Norwich Puppet Theatre, and I got to know them, and then it came that I got to know Alistair, and it coincided with me getting into folk music, but only knowing about the stuff in the past and not actually realising fully that other people my age were doing it. So that was another part of the, people do still do this. It's not just me weird alone in Norfolk getting interested in this. There's a thing. So, you know, I was very late coming to this, as I say. So that was an interesting thing as well. So, yeah, I heard his version.
Great. So yeah, were you sort of instantly taken with it? I mean, it's a heavy song, isn't it? It's a gruesome song.
Has anyone ever been instantly taken with Long Lankin? It's definitely captivating, and that's, I think I was really getting into. So I said about the Bollywood songs, the intensity of them, and that's definitely what I love about folk songs. Is there's a kind of intensity to a lot of them, and the thing I particularly like, especially with the big heavy ballads, is they're what I kind of like to think of pairs of opposites, and I would say that folk music doesn't shy away from the tender or the terrible, and so Lankin's definitely in the terrible kind of section,
yes,
if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
And I do remember hearing it, and the thing that struck me about that version, Alistair's version, and actually this was something that had struck me prior to that about some of Nick Jones's songs, that I'd been listening to, is that Alistair Roberts' version of that is done in a very upbeat, whimsical, kind of like quite nice la 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 kind of way, but it's really grim words. So there's something disarming about the musicality that then gives more impact to those words. And I've noticed some of that in some of Nick Jones' songs. Nick Jones does an interesting version of it's the Poison in the Glass of Wine song.
Oh yeah.
So not Lovely Molly, it's the one, I think it's called In Newport Town.
There's Newport Town or Oxford City in Worcester City. It's all that area of songs,
different
isn't it?
Names. So I sing that, but I sing the sort of recording version in a way from the Percy Grainger Lincolnshire dude recordings. I've forgotten his name.
Joseph Taylor.
Joseph Taylor, that's it. Yes, sorry, I was thinking George.
And that's Worcester. That's in Worcester City.
In Worcester City. So I sing that version, but then I remember Nick Jones doing this really lovely kind of almost like a love song tune, but to that song, and it was like, whoa, that's it. And then in a way, Alistair Roberts' version of Long Lankin sort of was the same. It's quite a whimsical's not the right word because that sounds like a disparaging term, but definitely. Disarming, I would say. So
is that version in a major key then?
Yeah, it's
I'm always interested by songs that the really horrific kind of subject matter, but there's sort of lovely melodies in major keys and things.
There's definitely interesting ways to approach it, because the thing is, I was really enjoying actually listening to you and Vic talk about how we all have a bit of a love of the macabre and a love of telling ghost stories and getting into the grisly. I think that's also another way you can do the song and really kind of lay it on thick and be in a doom and gloom way. And I think either, any way of doing these things is valid. You make it valid by caring about it. So
absolutely, because because I know your version, that's a minor key, isn't it? The version you're provided was later.
I think it's something a bit modal, but it's
it is, isn't it? Yes.
It's kind of do 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 do. So it's more kind of nursery rhyme-esque, which can also be unsettling. So I feel
it's an odd melody in that it's kind of in a major key, but it doesn't necessarily feel particularly happy.
No, it's like I feel so the sort of tune I chose for it is the one that it reminded me most of how nursery rhymes are, that they can be a little bit slightly creepy, but they're sort of simple on the surface. They've got this very simple tune and it seems sort of innocent enough, but
that's right, because I was trying to remember the melody for the one that I used to sing about 15 almost 20 years ago, it's odd to think, that was from the Penguin Book of English Folk Songs, an older print of it, and that's the version from Sister Emma that Vic mentioned. The said my lord to my lady as he mounted his horse, beware of Long Lankin that lives in the moss. So that's a proper sort of mean-spirited tune in a way. It's kind of
it's definitely got that sort of sinister edge. So it feels like it might kind of go into the major key, but it's like, no, we're going to keep it sinister with the sort of horror vibes.
Yeah, exactly. So your version then, give us a kind of journey from where you got it to how it ended up.
Okay, so this is a bit of a story to explain first. So it wasn't that I one day, so I'd known about the song for a while. I enjoyed hearing other people singing it. I had no particular feelings about it. But it wasn't that I'd gone, oh yeah, I'll learn a version of that for my repertoire. I'd sort of learnt it through folk osmosis. So I kind of knew all the words, knew different versions of the tune of it.
Folksmosis. We need a word for that. Folkmosis. Folkmosis.
Folkmosis. You heard it here first.
Osfolksis. We'll workshop that. We'll workshop that.
Yeah, Osfolksis sounds like if Ozzy Osbourne did folk, I think.
It does, yeah.
But maybe we could go with that.
Folkmosis. Anyway, we'll come back to that.
So that is a thing, isn't it? Folk osmosis. You hear a song loads in sessions, before you know it, you realise you know it. But what happened was I didn't elect, to do the song in the way that I've elected to do other songs. It was that I was asked to be, here's the key word, to be paid to be part of somebody else's. There's the special word though, you're a musician and you're freelance. Will you be paid to do this for me? Yes, is the answer. So what it was somebody else was doing an Arts Council project, a Develop Your Creative Practice project. They were somebody who works with puppetry and visual arts, and they were doing a project about Bedfordshire lace makers. Well, not just Bedfordshire lace makers, about lace makers in general. And the reason they came across me is because another Arts Council project, which had a fee attached, and I said yes, there's an organisation called the Invisible Folk Club. Steve and John organise all of that. They've been doing some really interesting projects recently as well, something with Angeline Morrison and Cohen Braithwaite Kilcoyne, I think is their latest thing, or certainly John's latest project. So anyway, Invisible Folk Club, they had some funding to do some research about Bedfordshire lace makers. And the reason this connects with folk music is because they discovered in, I think it was the Cowper Museum and some of the Bedfordshire museums, they discovered in the archive that actually lace makers were often a historical source of where folk songs were collected from. They often sang snippets of ballads and then sometimes snippets of little songs that were more like mnemonic rhymes to help remember the rhythm of hand making lace. This is so before machines, making it with bobbins and stuff. And anyway, Steve and John had asked me to learn some songs for them from their research, so I'd done that. And then through their project, this other person got in touch with them and said, hey, I want to do this project about lace makers and I'm looking for someone to help with the music. And they instantly said, you want to work with Gemma, who did this project with us, but she's also a puppeteer and you're a puppeteer. So that's how that happened. Wow. And the person was called Daisy Jordan. She's a brilliant artist. And what she actually wanted, so I'm going to be careful here because we've got a lot of scholars listening to this. So I'm going to say it in big words. What's going to happen now is we're going to move from the realm of fact into the realm of arts projects and using something as an inspiration for pure conjecture and a sort of fantasy project. And I'm saying that as a big disclaimer because I know it can be a huge bone of contention.
Okay.
So the project wasn't specifically about folk song and it wasn't even specifically about lace makers. It was using lace making as a starting point for her to explore some other things. And she did a lot of research on it. And then what she was looking for from me as a musician was character motifs. So she had identified different characters that she wanted to explore through puppetry, the characters of the lace makers, who were often women. It was often a bit of a sedentary trade. People lived in extreme poverty, often who were lace makers, and there were these lace making schools. And then she was interested in how could she explore music and character motifs. There was also she was looking quite a lot at the role of women and men. So you've got the women who are often lace makers, and then often you get these more powerful figures, such as the merchant, who are men, and these kind of ominous male characters, or sometimes ominous male characters. So she was looking for, she'd got this character of the merchant, and then also this kind of nightmare character that she created called Old Bob, which was in a sort of dreamlike scenario. And she wanted some themes for them. And so what we decided to do to find the character themes was to actually do a bit of research about what were the songs that lace makers were singing. And what came up was there were obviously snippets of songs, but then there were some of the big, heavy, quite macabre ballads involving infanticide that the lace makers seemed to sing. Now, she did a whole website about this, and she actually posited, Vic talked about positing theories about things. So with all these things, we've got the actual words of the song, and they give a level of reality to it. And then we've got certain facts that we know from history and things. But then there's a whole load of conjecture, and there's a whole load of why did these people sing these songs and all of this stuff. Vic talked about Long Lankin is certainly, even though there's not many printed sources of it, it was a really widespread ballad. Lots of people sang it. We can see in Child that there's like over 20 pages dedicated to that song. So we know it was, it was sung a lot. But what Daisy, who was doing the project on her blog, posited was that she was interested in the idea that maybe lacemakers sang this song because at the time they were living in poverty, and perhaps they liked the idea of the underdog, Lankin, kind of rising up against the masters and that sort of thing. So that's kind of getting into what I call pure conjecture, which you're free to do when you're an artist, and that's fine. It's more dangerous to do it if you're writing a paper about folk song, I feel.
Quite so.
Yeah, so what happened was we looked at some songs. We looked at Long Lankin. We looked at the Robber Bridegroom, the riddle song about the fox, and we looked at Cruel Lincoln, and we looked at the Outlandish Night. And as the first part of the project, I said, look, I'll record you some versions of these so you can hear them, because she'd seen them printed but not heard them, and we can see what you think. And then some of those morphed into instrumental stuff for her project, and I think we actually went with the Outlandish Night, an instrumental version I did. So that's a bit of a background there. It was really interesting, actually, the lacemakers stuff and looking into the history of that and some of the stuff that's written about lacemakers and the songs that were collected from them and all of that. So that's another piece of history adding into some of the stuff that Vic talked about.
Nice, yeah. So the version that you sung with that, then what's the where did you get the words melody for that?
Okay, so I think a lot of the words came from folk osmosis, and listening to Alistair Roberts' version was the first one I'd heard, and picking it up in sessions. And then I looked at a few things, and I would say that my main influence, certainly for the version that you're going to play on your show, and the version that I did for Daisy Jordan's Lacemakers project, I would say that Martin Carthy and Dave Swarbrick, their version of it was probably the main influence in terms of the tune. The words, what I tend to do with words, a lot of people are going to hate me saying this, is because I've got a background in theatre and story, what wires me in is I get the gist of a story, and then I sometimes just sort of cobble the words together. I sort of know where it's going, and I've heard it, I've got a good memory for songs, so if I've heard it once or twice, I think, I can sort of remember the verse structure there, and then I sometimes just fill in the blanks. Or a lot of time what I do is I go and I look on that wonderful site that we all love, Mainly Norfolk.
Oh, Mainly Norfolk.
With the millions of versions of words, and I scan through the words.
Yeah.
And I'll be like, oh yeah, that version I like the best. But then I'll come and I'll be like, oh, but I like the verse from that version. And then I'll just take that verse and shove it in. Isn't that dreadful?
Not at all. Not at all. There's no rule saying we shouldn't do it or can't do it.
So I think there was a bit of that going on, but
apart
there was
apart from a few stick in the muds, we won't name. There, it's all fine to do that. I mean, it won't mind. Dave Swarbrick once said that about messing up with tunes and things. It won't mind. Just do it.
Well, that's the folk process, isn't it? And it's also, it's not that I'm trying to say, oh yes, this is a version that I found, that only I've found, that this person's, because that's not true. It's just that I was captivated by the tune of the Swarbrick and Carthy version, so that's stuck in my head. And then there were different things. And then also, because it was somebody else's project, we did have a discussion about it. And even though that song didn't get used in the project, and then the songs that did get used, it was more that they were instrumental versions rather than the words. One thing we talked about with that song was she was quite keen for the pinpricking bits to happen and the windows to be pins, because there's, as you talked about with Vic, there's different versions of that or slightly different wording. And the reason that she wanted the pins is because obviously that then is a connection with the lace making, with the pins and things. So there's quite a lot of stuff going on here, as I say, and it's one of those things that you do when you're making an arts project. You try and layer things up so that there's I don't know, it's quite a nice way of building a skeleton for a project, I think, having these little connections and things. So we talked about that. I have my own versions I like, so I quite like the versions where the blood is collected in the basin, the silver basin for the blood to run in. I always like that bit. And I also like the nurse being burned and Lankin being hanged. It's a bit mean of me. I don't like it, but I mean that's
crime doesn't pay.
A resolution, the sort of payoff or whatever.
Yeah.
So I didn't seem to. I did have a look at the ones where it starts with the sort of the backstory that he's a stonemason that's not paid.
That's more in the Scottish version, isn't it? Vic was saying.
Yeah, so I couldn't quite sort of fit that in, but I do kind of like that bit. It's a really, when you start to look at all the different versions, there's lots of things. And one thing I wanted to put in, because I just think it's just a bit of a comment on, I don't know, on attitudes and things. I think it's so funny that the lady of the house is there confronted with this terrifying killer who's pricked her baby with pins and killed it, but then she's quite happy to offer her daughter to him in order to save their lives. Yes. Poor daughter, poor Betsy. She's quite happy. You'd have my daughter's hand in marriage, sort of thing. And it's like, So the version that you're going to play on your show is different to the version that I did for the arts project. For that, she wanted a specific tone. So even though I sang it straight initially, just recorded it as an unaccompanied thing, I added a bit of creepiness to it. So I did.
So what kind of arrangement did you bring to that?
So I do a thing a lot where, so I'll record something just straight unaccompanied, and that's the bass line. And then what I'll often do, messing around in digital editors, is I will do a lot of double tracking. So I'll double track it, so that's duplicating the original track, and then I turn the volume down on that one, but put quite a lot of echo on it, so that it sounds a bit like when you're singing in a church or something. So that just gives a layer to it. And then I also did that with some of the harmonies I added. I did some really quiet harmonies, which I also double tracked and put that treatment on, where they're very echoey and ghostly. The other thing I did was I used my Shruti box to create some drones. And the style I was going for, and this was partly because for this project she had a writing partner, and they'd got interested in nursery rhymes, and we did have a bit of a bone of contention because they were talking about using tunes from nursery rhymes for the stuff, and I was a bit against that because I was like, I find that a bit dangerous, because nursery rhymes have got their own connotations and their own context and their own backgrounds. A lot of, there's a lot of research got into those. So I just thought, and there's all, actually Vic mentioned even there's so many misconceptions about things, and he was saying about, is that song Ring a Ring a Roses about the plague? And it's like, well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, who cares? But then there is a feeling of certain things do have their own background, and I was thinking, I'm not sure I want to cross the streams, if you see what I mean. So
yes,
so indeed. I wasn't so keen on the nursery rhymes, but what I said I would go with is a nursery rhyme quality. So that's trying to make something a bit playground sounding, a bit ghostly. So that's what I did with the harmony strangeness and the double tracking, and using this echo effect on the double tracking and adding the drone sound. So I used the Shruti. I played a lot of just single drone notes, which again I added weird echo and reverb on, and then I layered them up into a kind of strange tune to go over the vocal. So that's to underpin the vocal. So that was that. And as I say, that was largely informed by the project and what she wanted. She was looking for something a bit unsettling to represent this particular male type of character that she was looking for in the show. So
right, great. Is there a recording of that arrangement for anywhere?
There is. It's on my Bandcamp is probably the easiest place to find it. So I've got an album called Projects 1, which was the lace stuff I did with the Invisible Folk Club, and then I've got Projects 2, which was all of the stuff, it's very scratch, all of the things that I recorded for Daisy Jordan's Arts Council project. And so Project 2, so initially it's just strange recordings that I made of the actual folk songs that we talked about in an initial discussion. So they're the ones I mentioned. So actually Shirt of Lace was one as well. The Robber Bridegroom, The Outlandish Night, which was a song I already did, but then I made this treatment of it. So I did a load of them, just this is the folk song, but this is a weird accompaniment. Right. Some of those were songs that were already about lace, so some of them are more modern composed things. So there was the Bone Lace Weaver. I did a version of that as well. And then from that, she picked out things, and we kind of explored and took it somewhere else. And so then there were the things that became the character themes that were used. And then some of those I was kind of forced to use some nursery rhymes, because the writer that she worked with had written some things that would only fit to certain nursery rhymes. So then I was like, okay, fine, I shall do your music arrangement based on that nursery rhyme. Because you're paying me.
Well, there we go, indeed.
And actually, it was a really lovely project, and it wasn't actually really a bone of contention. That was just what they wanted for those particular words. And I was like, well, that's fine. It's your project.
There you go. Great. Yeah.
Paying me. Did I say that? They pay. People pay you money to do things.
It's always nice when that happens. We'll put the links to that, your Bandcamp, in the episode notes then.
Yeah, there is also a link actually to Daisy's blog about the project, so you can see she made some really lovely animations and some little puppets and things, and so I can give you a link to that. So
please do. It'll all go in the episode notes.
Yeah, you can
check the episode notes, folks. Right. So, would you recommend any other modern or non-source recording versions then of this song? Who would you recommend people check out?
Yeah, so I've already mentioned a couple of them already. So I said about Alistair Roberts' version.
Oh, yeah, we'll start with Alistair Roberts, yeah.
Yeah, so that's probably the most modern version of it in my list. I think there are more modern versions of it. Lots of people have done it. I know you've got some.
I mean, in the terms of this podcast, modern just means not a source recording, really. I mean, modern goes from like 1960 or, well, the Carter family, even the Carter family kind of comes under modern rather than source recording in a way.
Maybe we mean commercial recordings.
Commercial recordings or, revival singers, but then the Carter family went revival. Anyway, that's a different kind of worms, different podcast. Alistair Roberts, you say, yes. Yeah,
so Alistair Roberts, that was the very first version that I'd heard not in a sing-around. And I just thought it was a really interesting version. I'm not going to go over the same ground because I've already said about why, which was that it was, the major tune and quite a sort of happy, dancey feel for a very macabre song. So I liked that. It was an interesting, and it's a full band arrangement as well. Often he does a lot of solo stuff, but this was with a full band. So it's interesting.
Right. Any others?
So obviously the one that I mainly took the tune from, that was Martin Carthy and Dave Swarbrick. I think that's a great version. So obviously that's from, I guess it's from the 60s, and it's
possibly 70s maybe.
It's just a really, what I'd call a really clean version. So it's really gets you again. It's kind of straight in there. And that's the tune I use, so it's kind of a major key, but in the way that nursery rhymes are, so it's quite just a bit eerie and unsettling, and I liked that.
Great, that's the second one. Any others?
Bert Lloyd, and he uses a slightly minor key for it.
Oh yeah, we had Bert Lloyd mentioned in episode 2 with Brian Peters, was talking a lot about Bert Lloyd.
Yeah, so the interesting thing about him is, I don't know who he said his source was for it, and I think I know that Brian Peters will say is Bert Lloyd did take liberties with things, but sometimes try and pass that off as this is the source recording, but he was a bit inventive, I think, with some of his arrangements, shall we say, and some of his positing about stuff, sometimes presenting stuff as actual fact, which was maybe a bit of hearsay, or he was quite come up with folklore things, and this is because of this, and aren't we all fantasists though at the end of the day to a certain extent? So, but it's just that thing of, I'm being really clear when I'm saying this, because I know there's so many scholars listening, but even though I'm an artist and I use things as pure conjecture, fantasy, things as the jumping off point for and fantastical exploration, I think you do have to be clear about when you're doing stuff like that. Oh, this is fact to whatever fact is, but this is this, and this is actually an idea I've taken from this. So this is, I like the idea. So you mentioned about bloodletting and things like that, and when you were talking about this song with Vic, and it's, we don't actually know is the answer, but this is a theory, and it's interesting to explore that and and you go off with that. But I think you get into dangerous ground if you start regurgitating that and saying, yes, this is what this is about. This is a child sacrifice that pertains to pagan stuff, and it's like, "Oh, maybe it is," but actually we don't know.
We don't know exactly. Quite so. Give us one more recommendation.
I'd go Heady West, actually. Again,
And I'll say it now, we never came back to it. Heady West is the name of the singer that John Bowden was trying to remember the surname of in episode 1. We never came back to that. We spent about 2 minutes trying to remember Heady West's surname. Heady West.
and I've picked Heady West because that's an American version, and there are some really interesting American versions. You're going to talk about the source singers, I know, with Vic, and pick those, but I really do love a lot of the source recordings. I mentioned earlier about my love of source recordings of things, so that was my main playing ground, I guess, getting into all of that.
And I'll recommend a handful of versions now. The Devil's Interval, which was fantastic. I mentioned this in the previous episode, The Devil's Interval. They were absolutely stellar 3-part harmony group consisting of Lauren McCormack, Jim Causley, and Emily Portman, who were met on the same university degree that I did, but a few years earlier. Their 2006 album Blood and Honey, and they did Long Lankin. That's the same Sister Emma version that I used to sing, which is really terrific. Steely Span did it on the album Commoner's Crown. It's a great version. And there was a really interesting album that came out a few years ago called The Axford Five, Songs Collected from 5 Hampshire Women, performed by the Askew Sisters and Craig Morgan and Robson. And Moira Craig sang Long Lanky on that, which I think is a really great version. And I'll lastly recommend Shirley Collins, the great Shirley Collins, sang it on her 2016 album Lodestar. That's the first album she made after a hiatus of several decades, 40 years, I think it was. And I think she sings, it's the version Cruel Lincoln, which in my chat with Vic earlier, we did mention Ben Butcher, and that's the same version. Shirley Collins sings the same version of that Ben Butcher had, Cruel Lincoln. And so that's a really terrific version. We'll put, if you can send me links to the ones you recommended, Gemma, we'll put all links to all 8 of those tracks will be in the episode notes. So I think we've come to the end of this. It's been really fascinating. Thank you very much for coming on and telling me all about that.
You're welcome. It was, as I say, for me, it was an interesting. It's not my usual way of coming to a folk song. So, as I say, it was for somebody else's project. But I think it's always fascinating to get into singing any folk song because they've all got such a rich history.
Absolutely.
And alongside the history, there's all of the kind of conjecture. What if? Does it mean this? Does it mean that? Kind of diversion that you can send your brain on as well, wondering about, what's that bit about? What's this? What's that? And
absolutely, it's a whole world of research and songs, and you can get bogged down in it or not. But most of us love to. Anyway, we'll call time there on this. Gemma, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Said the Lord to his lady as he mounted his horse, beware of Long Lankin, who lives in the moors. Said the Lord to his lady as he went on his way, beware of Long Lankin, who lives in the hay. Let the doors all be bolted and the windows all pinned, and leave not one space for a mouse to crawl in. So the doors they were all bolted and the windows all pinned, except one small window where Long Lankin crawled in. Where's the lord of this house? Up spake Long Lankin. He's away up to London, said the false nurse within. Where's the young lord of this house? Up spake long Lankin. He's asleep in his cradle, said the false nurse to him. Then we'll prick him, we will prick him all over with a pin, and that'll make his lady come a-running down to him. So they have pricked him all over with a pin, and the nurse held a silver basin for his blood to flow in. Oh, nurse, how you slumber, oh, nurse, how you sleep, for you leave my pretty baby to cry and to weep. Oh, nurse, how you slumber, oh, nurse, how you snore, for you leave my pretty baby all to cry and to roar. Well, I've tried him with an apple, I have tried him with a pear. Come down, my fair lady, and rock him in your chair. For I've tried him with milk, and I've tried him with pap. Come down, my fair lady, and rock him in your lap. How can I come down in the dead of the night, with no candle to light me, or no fire burning bright? You have 3 silken gowns, all as bright as the sun. Come down, my pretty lady, by the light of just one. So the ladies come down, and not thinking no harm, but long Lankin was a-waiting for to catch her in his arms. You can have my daughter Betsy, so young and so sweet. You can have as much money as there's stones in the street. I don't want your daughter Betsy, or the stones in the street. I would rather see your life's blood running down at my feet. There was blood in the kitchen, there was blood in the hall, there was blood in the parlour where the lady did fall. Young Betsy stood out on her window so high, and she saw her dear father come riding close by. Oh, father, dearest father, don't lay the blame on me. 'Twas the false nurse at Lankin that killed your lady. Oh, father, dearest father, don't lay the blame on me. 'Twas the false nurse at Lankin that killed your baby. Long Lankin shall be hanged from the gallows so high, and the false nurse shall be burned in the fire close by.
That was Gemma Khawaja singing Long Lankin. That brings us to the end of this episode. What did you think? What are your thoughts on the song? Do you have any thoughts on the song? I'd love to hear from you. Drop us an email at intheroud@singyonder.co.uk or visit us on the various social medias. Just search for In the Roud, a folk song podcast. If you're enjoying the podcast, I'd very much appreciate it if you would give us a little rating and review on wherever you get your podcasts from. That really helps the podcast to reach a wider audience. One last huge thanks to this week's guests, Vic Gammon and Gemma Khawaja. Join me next week for episode 7. We'll be looking at Roud 7, which is The Female Highwayman. My historical guest will be Steve Roud, and my singer guest will be Laura Smith. That's it from me. Stay safe, be well, and I'll see you next time in the Roud.